I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life." The word of God for the people of God. Please be seated. Well, grace and peace to the disciples of Jesus. Do you like stories of buried treasure? Here's one that you may not have heard. According to a legend from the Wild West back in the 1780s, 1870s, 80s, 90s, notorious outlaw Jesse James and his gang stole millions of dollars worth of gold bullion from a Mexican general. The men proceeded to bury their treasure somewhere in the Wichita Mountains of Oklahoma. Rumor had it that Jesse had scratched a secretly coded map on an old bucket and left it as a landmark. One source says that after Jesse's death, his brother Frank James bought a farm near the Wichita Mountains and spent the rest of his life searching for the treasure, but he never did find it. Sometime in the 1950s, a local man dug up a bucket and some picks buried in the field of these mountains. The bucket had some markings scratched on it. So far, however, no one has been able to make sense of the code, and so according to the legend, Jesse James' treasure remains buried somewhere in Oklahoma. If any of you decide to head to Oklahoma to search for that treasure, just remember the church, 10%. Speaking of treasure, I want to suggest to you that someone here today is searching for something, and you're not even sure what it is. There is a restlessness in your life, an undefined longing. And I hope when you leave here today, you will be able to say, "This is it." I say that because I believe the Scriptures can meet our deepest needs. Consider today's word from the book of Revelation. "Behold, I make all things new." Wouldn't it be great to leave this place a new person? According to our lesson from the book of Revelation, God is in the business of making all things new. When God does a new thing in our lives, he starts with the foundation and builds from there. At Lystra, there was a disabled man who could not use his feet. It was St. Paul whom God used to give this man new hope, new life. Paul, looking at him intently, said in a loud voice, "Stand upright on your feet." And the man sprang up and walked. He had been given a great gift, the gift of a new and improved life. Of course, Paul himself knew what it was to be made a new person. Remember, Paul, who earlier in the text was Saul, became a new person, a dynamic preacher from a persecutor of the Christians. New teachings, new life, new hope, new direction. That is what the gospel is all about. We can be new persons. We can have new life in Jesus. "Behold, I make all things new." In Christ, the old saying, "Old dogs can't learn new tricks," is not true. In Christ, no matter what your age is, you can be made anew. What is that prevents real change from taking place in our lives? Doesn't it all come down to two small voices deep in our consciousness? Two small voices that speak to us in every one of our waking hours. The first is a voice that tells us that things are just fine. things are good enough, we become complacent. We may recognize that our lives, our relationships, our jobs are not all they could be or should be because we are not ready to pay the price to change. Michael Slater tells a story in his book, Stretcher's Bearers, of a teen at the beach with his friends. Now he is out there in the water and he's in trouble, but he doesn't call for help. A lifeguard notices that he's struggling and rescues him. Later he asks the teen, "You were drowning. Why didn't you call for help?" The young man responded like this, "What would my friends have thought of me?" Some of us have a voice within us that says, "I know I need to change, but I just can't ask for help. I'm just too proud. What would my friends think?" Now, some of us have a voice within us that is saying to us that change is for other people, but not for us. We are good enough, strong enough, capable enough. So we miss the joy of a new life because we listen to that voice that says, "I'm okay, I'm just fine." But there is another voice that speaks to many of us. It is a voice that says, "I'm too bad to change." You know, it's that voice that keeps people out of God's church because they honestly think they are not good enough to come into God's house. That's a shame. I won't ask you to hold up your hand if you've ever bought a self-help book or ever gone on a diet or made a New Year's resolution. What is it that defeats many of us when we try to make a meaningful change in our lives? Is it that small voice that says, "You can't do it, you haven't got what it takes, you never see anything through to completion"? For some of us, there is a voice that says, "You are just fine, no need to change." And for others, it is this voice that says, "You're too bad to change." Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some of us have a little voice saying, "You don't have anything that you need to change." Some of us are saying to ourselves, "I can't change anyhow, so why try?" Some of you will remember the Broadway show from the 60s, The Man of La Mancha. The main character is Don Quixote. Now, Don Quixote meets a woman with low morals and low self-esteem, and her name is Aldonza. He tells her, "You will be my lady." And then he gives her a new name, Dulcinea. She laughs scornfully at Don Quixote, but he keeps affirming her and declaring her to be what he wants her to be. When she appears on stage later, she again hears the voice of Quixote saying, "My lady." "Don't call me my lady," she says. "I was born in a ditch by a mother who left me there naked and cold and too hungry to cry. Don't call me a lady. I am Aldonza. I am nothing at all." And she runs off the stage into the night. Don Quixote calls after her, "But you are my lady, Dulcinea." And at the end of the play, a much older Don Quixote is dying, scorned, been laughed at, and rejected. Suddenly to his side comes what appears to be a Spanish queen. She is beautiful and proud. When the old man asks, "Who are you?" she responds, "Don't you remember? You called me your lady. You gave me a new name. I am Dulcinea." There are two voices within each one of us. One tells us that we are just fine and we don't need to change. The second tells us that we're too bad to change. What we need is to hear God's voice saying, "Behold, I make all things new." The affirmation that Don Quixote gives to Dulcinea is the affirmation that God gives to each and every one of us. We are that important to Him. As someone once put it, if we were the only person in the world, Jesus still would have given His life in our behalf. One day a man and his daughter climbed to a summit on their estate, and the man said, "Look up." Then he said, "Look down," and then "Look out." He then added, Dorothy, just so high, so deep, so wide, and so broad is the love of God for you. She learned a lesson she would never forget. But she also taught her daddy one that he would never forget. Daddy, she said, if God's love is so high, so wide, so deep, and so broad, then we are living in the middle of it. What difference would it make in your life if you really believed that you are living in the middle of God's love? God loves you and wants to do a new thing in your life. But how? How does God make all things new? He does it by giving us three things: a new confidence, a new perspective, and a new dream. Let's consider briefly those three gifts God gives us. What a massive change would take place in our lives if we could have a new confidence. Confidence in ourselves. Confidence in God. I think sometimes we don't ask God to do those huge things in our lives because we don't have the confidence that God will make it happen. What a difference if we could wake up in the morning and say, truly this is the day that the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. If we could live openly and honestly with that belief within us, we may not feel adequate, but God is adequate enough for each and every one of us. How many people do you meet, you're at work, and I hate it when people do this. I don't hate many things, but this just, really? Go back home, go to bed. Now, you say, hey, how's your day? And they go, I'm here. Really? Go home. If life is that bad, go home. I don't want you around me. Every day you're upright is a gift from God. And God can do new things in us if we have the right attitude. We may not feel adequate, but God is adequate enough for each and every one of us. I invite you to start each new day with that positive affirmation. God is making each of us a new person. Remember what I said about Luther? Luther said, recognize your baptism. Because every day you get up, God has made you new in the gift of holy baptism. And in that baptism, He gives us a new confidence. But He also gives us a new perspective. One of the greatest gifts that we can receive is the ability to step back and look at our lives realistically. It is so tempting to be defeated by those inner voices that tell us we can't. I don't know what we can't means. I refuse to listen to anyone who tells me that I can't. Because when you buy into that, you can't. How often do we say or feel, this is the worst day of my life. How could that happen to me? When an objective view of the matter will reveal really that it's only a temporary setback. Perhaps this is one of the most blessed benefits of prayer. Spending time alone with God helps us to develop a new perspective, a perspective that allows us to reflect rather than simply react. Prayer also allows us to gain a godly perspective. A new confidence, a new perspective. But God gives us one thing more, a new dream. To a great extent, we are shaped by our dreams. Most people get out of life exactly what they really desire. The problem is in knowing ourselves well enough to know what we really desire. How about you? Do you know yourself well enough to know what your deepest desire is? For some, it is that personal thing that we want to change. For others, it may be that we want people to like us more. We want to be more respected by our colleagues. What is your deepest desire? What is your greatest dream? And God said, behold, I make all things new. Does anybody remember the country show Hee Haw? Now, one of the stars on that show was named Lulu Roman. Now, Lulu grew up in an orphanage. Her greatest dream was to be adopted and have a family who loved her. She was a heavy kid, so kids bullied her and she never got adopted. Lulu started taking drugs to escape the pain of loneliness and rejection. And as she became more successful, Lulu's addiction grew. She got kicked off the show, discovered she was pregnant, and became bitter and angry toward God. She felt there was no way God could love her. Lulu's son Damon was born with serious health problems related to her drug use. Lulu reports, "I can remember lying in that hospital bed, trying to pray, but I was so mad at God and I didn't want anything to do with Him. So the only thing I knew to say is, yo, dude, if you're real, here's my deal. If you'll let my baby live, I'll straighten up, I'll stop doing drugs, and I'll do anything you want me to do." A few days later, Lulu and her child went home. Not long afterwards, Lulu ran into Diane, a girl she'd grown up with in the orphanage. Now, Diane had become a Christian, and she wanted to share her faith with Lulu. Lulu tried to shut her up, but Diane said, "Just listen to me." Lulu did listen, and she gave her life to Christ that day. And she says, at that moment, she found a love that she had never experienced before in her life. She instantly lost her desire for drugs. Now, when the producers of Hee Haw heard how she turned her life around, they invited her to come back on the show. She used her fame to share her testimony how Jesus had changed her life completely. How His love and grace had given her a new life that she thought was impossible for her. We need to listen to Jesus. He will give you a new confidence, a new perspective, and a new dream. We need to listen to the voice that seeks to encourage us and remake us. Jesus says that each and every one of us, "Behold, I make all things new."